The world remembers legendary men for what they achieved. The fame, the power, the names that refused to die even after they did. But for their sons, those names often became a burden. Because growing up as the child of a global icon doesn't just mean inheriting fame. It means spending your life being compared to someone the world already decided was greater than you could ever become. Some spent years trying to escape their father's shadows. Others destroyed themselves, trying to live up to them. And some never got the chance to become anything beyond the legacy they inherited. These are the celebrity sons who could never fully escape their father's dark legacy. Brandon Lee, the son who never got the chance to become himself. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, at the age of 32. His son Brandon was 8 years old. Bruce Lee did not simply leave behind a career. He left behind a myth, a global icon whose image became even larger after death than it had been during life. His face appeared on posters in every country. His films redefined an entire genre, and his name, within months of his death, had become shorthand for something the world had never quite seen before, and would never stop looking for again. Brandon Lee didn't grow up beside his father's legacy. He grew up trapped inside it. As a child, he tried to sign up with a local martial arts studio. He walked through the door, saw a large poster of his father on the wall, and ran out in tears. That image, a boy running from his own father's face, tells you everything about what the next 20 years were going to cost him. He became an actor. He trained in martial arts the way his father had, not to imitate him, but because it was in his blood, and he knew no other entry point into the industry. He made low-budget action films in Hong Kong and Los Angeles. He was good. He was getting better. And he was fighting, constantly, against the weight of a comparison he had not asked for and could not shake. "I don't want to be remembered as the son of Bruce Lee," he said. "You cannot make choices in your career based on trying to downplay or live up to a comparison with somebody else. You have to do your own work based on your own gut, your own instincts, and your own life." When he was cast as Eric Draven in The Crow, a rock musician who returns from the dead to avenge his own murder, it was supposed to be the moment. The role that proved he was his own actor. Dark, complex, emotionally layered. Nothing like his father's work. On March 30th, 1993, near the end of filming, a prop gun was fired at him during a scene. The gun had been loaded with dummy rounds for earlier close-up shots. A fragment of a bullet had lodged in the barrel and been forgotten. When the blank was fired, it drove that fragment into Brandon Lee's abdomen. He was airlifted to hospital. Hours of surgery followed. He was pronounced dead the following afternoon. He was 28 years old. He was due to be married 17 days later. He was buried in Seattle at Lakeview Cemetery, beside his father. At 28 years old, Brandon Lee died before the world ever got the chance to see who he might have become beyond his father's shadow. The Crow was completed using a stunt, double, and digital effects. It became a cult classic. It is, to this day, the film Brandon Lee is most remembered for. He spent his whole life trying to be seen as himself. In the end, it was his death that gave him the largest audience he ever had. But not every famous father leaves behind tragedy through death. Sometimes the burden of a famous father isn't losing him too early. Sometimes it's never fully having him at all. Julian Lennon. The son the world knew better than his father did. Millions of people felt emotionally connected to John Lennon, but his own son often felt emotionally distant from him. Julian Lennon was born on April 8, 1963, to John Lennon and his first wife, Cynthia. By the time Julian was 5, the Beatles were the most famous band on Earth. By the time he was 7, his parents had divorced. John had left Cynthia for Yoko Ono, moved to New York, and built a second family with their son, Sean, the child he was more publicly devoted to, the child he chose to be present for. Julian grew up in England, seeing his father sporadically, knowing him mostly through headlines and album covers and the opinions of strangers who had never met him. The strangest part of Julian's childhood was not the absence. It was what filled the space left by that absence. Because the world was full of people who loved his father, who felt that John Lennon understood them, spoke for them, gave voice to their deepest hopes and fears. Julian did not feel that. He felt abandoned. "I've never really wanted to know the truth about how Dad was with me," he said. "There was some very negative stuff talked about me, like I was a mistake. And then there was Hey Jude." Paul McCartney wrote it in 1968, driving to see Cynthia and Julian after John left. He was thinking about the 5-year-old boy whose father had just walked out. The original title was Hey Jules. It was written for Julian, a song telling him to be strong, to find his way through the mess, to not be afraid. Millions of people have sung that song for decades without knowing the story behind it. Julian knew, and for years, he called it a dark reminder of what actually happened, rather than the comfort it was meant to be. After John was shot dead in December 1980, Julian discovered he had been almost entirely excluded from his father's will. Yoko Ono controlled the estate. Julian fought for years to receive any meaningful inheritance. And when his father's memorabilia was auctioned off, Julian spent £25,000 to buy back the recording notes for Hey Jude. The song, written to comfort him as a child, became something he later had to buy back at auction. He has a few photographs of his father, his manager said at the time, but not very much else. He is collecting for personal reasons. These are family heirlooms. Julian launched his own music career in 1984 with Velotte, an album that was genuinely well-received, Grammy-nominated, and almost immediately compared to his father's work by every single person who reviewed it. He has never matched that early commercial success. He has never stopped making music, and he has never stopped being asked, in every interview, about John. He told Elton John recently that he felt closer to Paul McCartney growing up than he ever felt to his own father. "There are far more pictures of me and Paul playing together at that age than there are of me and Dad." For years, Julian Lennon lived inside the strange experience of grieving a father the entire world adored, but he never fully had. And sometimes, a father's struggles don't disappear with fame. They continue through the next generation. Charlie Sheen, the legacy that became destruction. Martin Sheen was one of the most respected actors of his generation. He was also a recovering alcoholic who understood, from the inside, what addiction did to a life. His son Charlie, born Carlos Estevez in 1965, the third of Martin's 4 children, grew up watching a father navigate the pressures of Hollywood while quietly fighting his own demons. Martin had his own psychotic episode on camera during the filming of Apocalypse Now in 1979. He had his own years of darkness. He found sobriety through AA and held on to it. Charlie did not find it so easily. He rose fast. By the mid-1980s, he was one of the most promising young actors in Hollywood: Platoon, Wall Street, Major League. By the 1990s, the darkness had caught up with him. Alcohol, cocaine, crack cocaine. He tried his first stint in rehabilitation at the age of 24, after his family staged an intervention. He got out. He fell back in. In 1998, Charlie overdosed on cocaine. His father called the U.S. Marshals. When Charlie's bodyguard knocked on his door and said, "The Marshals are on the way. We're leaving in 5," Charlie didn't know that his father had turned him in for violating his probation. "It felt like the biggest betrayal you could possibly endure," Charlie said. He saw it as love eventually, but in the moment, he wanted control over his own life. And he hated the feeling that his father had taken it from him. But he was. Martin said publicly about watching his son spiral, He was in a very desperate situation. Only those of us who knew him understood what was going on. I wouldn't be human if I didn't have very deep feeling for him. There's something that I understand about that. You can assure them you're there and you love them, but you cannot effect change. The world watched Charlie Sheen unravel in public. But behind the headlines was a family story much older than the scandals themselves. Charlie's brother Emilio Estevez put it plainly. It really gives credence to this theory that it is genetic, and that sometimes it skips a generation or siblings. Charlie Sheen didn't inherit his father's fame alone. He inherited the same vulnerability, the same darkness, dressed in a different decade, but recognizably the same wound. He has been sober since 2017. He said recently he went to work on making amends to the people he hurt. He is still working on it. But not every famous father tried to protect his son from pressure. Some believed pressure itself was the answer. Scott Eastwood, the son forced to earn every inch of his name. Clint Eastwood is one of the most iconic figures in the history of American cinema. Scott Eastwood was born in 1986, the son of Clint and flight attendant Jocelyn Reeves. Not a marriage, not a formal relationship, but a son nonetheless. He grew up in Hawaii with his mother until, as he put it, I pissed her off, and then I came to live with my dad and pissed him off. He wanted to act. His father had no interest in making it easy for him. My dad never gave me a cent, Scott said. He made me work for everything. Before Scott appeared in a single professional credit, he parked cars. He did construction. He worked the kind of jobs that had nothing to do with cinema and everything to do with Clint's philosophy. That a man who has not worked with his hands has not earned the right to say he understands the world. Scott used his mother's surname when he began auditioning, going by Scott Reeves. He did not want the Eastwood name to open doors. He wanted to find out if any doors would open for him at all. When he eventually adopted the Eastwood name in 2008, it was a deliberate choice. I just wanted to prove to myself that I could carry on his name, he said. Even then, Clint kept the pressure on every film set where both of them worked, Flags of Our Fathers, Gran Torino, Invictus, Trouble with the Curve. Clint was harder on Scott than on anyone else. No special treatment, no allowances. He doesn't want any favoritism at all, Scott said. He was tough on me on all of them. Clint's advice, given early. Whatever you do, do it well. Be humble, work hard, and be a man. It is the kind of advice that sounds simple and costs everything to follow when the person giving it is Clint Eastwood, and the world is watching to see whether you have earned the right to share his name. Scott Eastwood spent years trying to prove he deserved opportunities people assumed had simply been handed to him. He has built a real career: The Longest Ride, Suicide Squad, Pacific Rim, Uprising. And he has built it without his father's assistance and with his father's full attention on every mistake he made along the way. There is a different kind of pressure in being loved that way. The pressure to prove you deserve the name you carry. It is not the same as the grief Brandon carried, or the abandonment Julian felt, or the inheritance Charlie could not outrun, but it is a weight, and Scott has carried it year by year with the specific, quiet determination of a man who knows he will never be judged on his own terms, only ever compared to his father's. The weight of a famous name. Different fathers, different sons, the same emotional burden, living beneath legendary men. Brandon Lee was handed a myth at 8 years old and died at 28, still trying to step out of its shadow. Julian Lennon was given a song before he was given a father, and spent decades buying back pieces of the man who left him. Charlie Sheen inherited the same darkness his father had fought and lost to it in ways that played out on every front page for 20 years. And Scott Eastwood was handed not a gift, but a standard, one set by a man who believed the only way to honor a name was to earn it every single day. The public sees fame as something families inherit. But for many celebrity sons, fame became a shadow they spent their entire lives trying to outrun. Because sometimes, the greatest challenge isn't becoming famous. Because sometimes, the hardest part of inheriting a famous name is spending your entire life trying to become your own person beneath it. And we want to hear from you. Out of these 4 stories, which son do you think carried the heaviest emotional burden? Brandon, Julian, Charlie, or Scott? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe so you never miss another one.